You know a breakthrough is near when heaven interrupts your life in a way you didn't expect. Sometimes it doesn't come with a miracle, a prophecy, or an open door. Sometimes it begins quietly, when suddenly the things that once excited you no longer move you. The people you used to depend on feel distant, and the places you found comfort no longer fit. That shift is not confusion, it is divine preparation. It is the sign that God has placed his hand on you for something greater. There comes a moment when God starts detaching you from emotional attachments that kept you small. He will pull your heart away from things you thought you needed, because he is training you for what he already prepared. You may not understand why your spirit feels disconnected from circles that once felt like home. You may feel a strange calm in situations that used to trouble you. That is not you losing passion. That is God stabilizing your identity so your breakthrough does not collapse under insecurity. Whenever God chooses someone for a greater assignment, he first breaks their dependence on people. He removes the need for approval. He silences the craving for validation. He untangles you from the emotions that tied your destiny to opinions, relationships, or environments. You start realizing that your peace no longer comes from who stays, but from who God is. That is the unexpected sign. Your heart becoming strong in quiet ways no one can see. Breakthrough begins within long before it appears around you. God is preparing your spirit to hold the weight of what he is about to release. That's why certain connections fade without conflict. That's why certain desires die without warning. That's why you no longer feel pressure to chase what everyone else is chasing. Heaven is cutting emotional cords that kept you tied to an old version of yourself. Because where God is taking you, that version cannot go. And when you feel that holy detachment, don't resist it. That is God saying, I am making room. He removes what drains your focus so you can discern his voice. He separates you from temporary things so you can recognize eternal purpose. He allows your spirit to feel empty so he can fill you with instruction, vision, clarity, and strength. Your breakthrough is not coming. It has already started. It started the moment God began detaching your heart from anything that could distract you from destiny. When God prepares a person for elevation, he rarely begins with addition, he begins with separation. This is one of the most misunderstood principles of divine breakthrough. We often expect God to announce increase with open doors, new relationships, expanded opportunities, or sudden miracles. But heaven's process is far more deliberate, far more surgical, far more purposeful. Before God entrusts you with greater influence, greater authority, or greater responsibility, he starts by removing the things that cannot survive where you are going. Separation is not rejection. It is refinement. It is the careful work of a master who understands that destiny is too heavy to be carried with unnecessary weights tied to your soul. There comes a point when God himself interrupts your environment, your relationships, and even your emotional attachments, because the place you are in is no longer compatible with the purpose he has placed within you. You may feel confused when people drift away without explanation. You may feel tension in spaces that once felt peaceful. You may begin to notice that conversations you used to enjoy now feel draining, that habits you once embraced now feel restricting, that places you once found comfort in now feel too small. This shift isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something is growing inside you. God is stretching your spirit beyond the boundaries of your familiar world. Divine separation often feels like loss, but heaven calls it preparation. God never subtracts without intention. He removes only what would sabotage your elevation. Many times, the things God separates you from are not evil. They are simply not aligned with the version of you that must emerge for his assignment to be fulfilled. What once served your development can become a limitation in the next season, What once fit your level of maturity may no longer fit your calling. And so God begins to loosen the ties, not abruptly, but quietly, gradually, almost imperceptibly, until you wake up one day and realize the old world can no longer hold the new you. When God separates before He elevates, He does it to protect the destiny He placed inside you. If He were to elevate you without first detaching you from certain relationships, you might drag people into your future who were never meant to accompany you there. If He lifted you before shifting your identity, you might step into opportunities still carrying insecurities that would ruin the blessing. If He promoted you without adjusting your internal environment, you might cling to patterns that would suffocate your purpose. Separation becomes God's way of securing your breakthrough. It is the divine filter that ensures nothing enters your next season that could pollute it. This separation can manifest in unexpected ways. Sometimes you notice that conversations no longer resonate. The same advice that once guided you suddenly feels irrelevant. The voices you used to rely on no longer carry the same weight. It is not that these individuals have changed. It is that your spirit has begun to outgrow what they represent. Your appetite for truth deepens. Your desire for purpose intensifies. Your sensitivity to divine instruction sharpens. This internal evolution makes it impossible to remain connected to environments that feed the old you while starving the emerging you. God is not taking people away from you. He is calling you toward who you must become. Other times, separation shows up as internal restlessness. You may feel like you no longer belong where you are, even if nothing externally has shifted. You may sense that your spirit is being stirred, almost pushed towards something you cannot fully identify. That stirring is God's gentle way of telling you that your current season is expiring. The assignment attached to where you are has been completed. The growth that place could produce has already taken root. Now God must move you, not because the place is wrong, but because your destiny requires a new environment to flourish. Restlessness becomes the holy agitation that pushes you out of comfort and into calling. There are also moments when separation is abrupt. A door closes unexpectedly. A relationship ends suddenly. An opportunity dissolves without warning. In these moments, it is tempting to assume that the enemy is attacking you. But often, it is God shielding you. He saw what you could not see. He heard conversations behind closed doors. He knew the motives of hearts you trusted. He understood the future consequences of connections you thought were harmless. And so He intervened, not to hurt you, but to protect you from something that would have delayed or destroyed the elevation He has prepared. This is why separation is such a profound sign of divine activity. God never elevates someone who is still tied to things that weaken their spiritual authority. He will not promote someone who finds comfort in old environments that contradict their new identity. He will not release breakthrough into a life still cluttered with distractions, emotional entanglements, or unpurposed attachments. Elevation requires clarity, strength, and focus. Separation clears the space for these qualities to mature. You begin to recognize this divine pattern when you notice that you are no longer triggered by the same battles that once consumed you. You no longer feel compelled to prove yourself. You no longer cling to the approval of others. The opinions that once influenced you no longer hold power. This internal detachment signals that God has begun to elevate your perspective. You are seeing from a higher place, and because you see from a higher place, you cannot stay attached to what operates at a lower level. When God separates you, He is actually making room. Room for new wisdom, new relationships, new opportunities, new spiritual strength. The separation prepares your character to sustain the breakthrough. It matures your discernment. It purifies your motives. It closes your heart to what would break you and opens it to what will build you. It shifts your dependency from external affirmation to divine direction. God separates you because He is about to trust you with more. He's about to expose you to a deeper dimension of purpose. And that dimension requires a version of you that is free, focused, and spiritually grounded. The separation might feel uncomfortable, but elevation always demands discomfort. Growth always disrupts normalcy. Transformation always requires release. Every time God prepares a vessel for extraordinary purpose, he begins by removing everything that would keep that vessel ordinary. When God chooses you for a breakthrough, he begins by disconnecting you from the identities, emotional patterns, and environments that once defined you. This disconnection is rarely dramatic. It is usually subtle, almost invisible to others, yet deeply felt within you. You start sensing that something in you is shifting. Something in you is stretching. Something in you is awakening. What you're feeling is not confusion or decline. It is identity transformation orchestrated by heaven. Breakthrough requires a new version of you. And God will not allow the weight of your next season to rest on an outdated identity. He begins the process by gently loosening the emotional ties that keep you anchored to who you used to be. There are moments when you look at your life and see that your passions have changed. The things that once fueled you no longer ignite you. Conversations that once fed your soul now leave you empty. Desires you once chased now feel small and irrelevant. These feelings can be difficult to understand, especially when nothing outwardly has changed. But inwardly, everything has. God is reprogramming your internal world because he cannot elevate someone who is still mentally attached to their old capacity. He must shift your identity before he shifts your environment. One of the most powerful ways God begins this transition is by allowing relationships to lose their emotional power over you. You don't hate anyone. You don't feel anger. You simply feel a quiet detachment, a calm distance, a sense that certain people no longer carry the ability to define your worth, direct your decisions. People who once had emotional influence begin to feel less significant, not because you have become cold, but because your identity is being anchored in something deeper. God is relocating your confidence, moving it away from human validation and planting it firmly in divine purpose. This internal relocation is essential for breakthrough. Because if people can define you, they can also limit you. Sometimes you feel this shift in the form of dissatisfaction. You could be surrounded by everything familiar. Friends, routines, work, comfort, and yet your spirit begins to whisper that you no longer belong here. It's not restlessness for the sake of movement. It is the quiet announcement that your current identity has expired. God has already begun shaping the future version of you, and that future version cannot survive in the emotional environment you are still attached to. So he disconnects you slowly, gently, and intentionally. This disconnection can also show up as a sudden loss of interest in things that once mattered deeply. You might find yourself uninterested in certain conversations, unbothered by old arguments, unmoved by old temptations. This emotional stillness is not numbness. It is maturity. It is a sign that God has strengthened your inner world to the point where external situations no longer dictate your emotional state. When you start responding with wisdom instead of reaction, peace instead of frustration, clarity instead of confusion, it is evidence that your identity has shifted. You are no longer living from your history. You are living from your destiny. God disconnects you because he wants to free you from the emotional patterns that controlled you. Some people are tied to cycles that keep them small. Not because they lack calling, but because they remain emotionally attached to old patterns of thinking. When God chooses you, he breaks these cycles. He disrupts the emotional dependencies that drain your strength. He ends the internal agreements you made with fear, insecurity, approval, and inadequacy. You begin to realize that you no longer feel the same anxiety about being misunderstood, rejected, or overlooked. You are being stabilized spiritually. And once God stabilizes your identity, nothing external can destabilize it again. There are seasons when God allows silence to become your teacher. In the quiet, you learn to hear your own thoughts without outside influence. You learn to hear his voice without the interference of opinions. This solitude can feel lonely, but it is holy. It is the sacred space where God removes every false identity you adopted from people, culture, or experience. He strips you of labels that were never yours. He heals the emotional wounds that shaped your reactions. He removes the fear that once dictated your choices. What remains is the pure, refined, unshakable version of you. The one he always intended. When God detaches you emotionally, he is not leaving you empty. He is making room for truth. He is making room for strength. He is making room for courage. He is making room for spiritual clarity. A chosen person must be able to walk into breakthrough without being manipulated by old attachments. God cannot elevate someone who is still emotionally entangled with things that contradict their purpose. So he breaks the ties, not to punish you, but to prepare you. You may notice that you start thinking differently. Your perspective becomes sharper. You see situations for what they truly are. You recognize motives more clearly. You no longer ignore red flags out of emotional desperation. You stop justifying behavior that does not align with your value. This clarity is evidence that your identity is evolving. You are no longer driven by insecurity. You are driven by discernment. You are no longer guided by fear. You are guided by purpose. Sometimes this transformation feels uncomfortable because you're shedding layers you thought you needed. You may feel uncertain about who you are becoming, but every breakthrough requires identity expansion. You cannot enter a bigger purpose with a smaller mindset. God is not changing you. He is revealing you. The version of you that is emerging is the one he designed before life shaped you with experiences, disappointments, and fears. When God chooses you, he disconnects you from anything that competes with his voice. Emotional detachment becomes a holy sign that you are being positioned for something greater. Your heart becomes quieter. Your mind becomes clearer. Your spirit becomes stronger. You stop clinging and start discerning. You stop reacting and start seeing. You stop depending on what is fading and begin trusting what is eternal. Identity transformation is the doorway to breakthrough. Before God changes your situation, he changes your self-perception. Before he opens the door, he prepares the person. Before he reveals the blessing, he prepares the heart that will carry it. The disconnection you feel is not the loss of who you are. It is the unveiling of who you were always meant to be. When God is preparing you for a breakthrough, he must first bring your spirit into a place of inner stillness. This stillness is not emptiness, and it is not passivity. It is a sacred quieting of the soul, so that divine instruction can be heard without interference. In a world full of noise, distraction, comparison, and emotional chaos, the voice of God does not compete, it waits. Breakthrough cannot manifest in a heart that is overwhelmed, confused, or cluttered with unnecessary noise. So God begins the process by gently removing distractions, clearing internal space, and softening the emotional storms that once dominated your thinking. He leads you into stillness because what he wants to give you requires clarity, precision, and spiritual alignment. There are times when life becomes strangely quiet. People fade. Conversations lessen, invitations stop, activities that once consumed your time suddenly disappear. Even your own emotions begin to settle. What you once felt intensely now seems distant. What used to irritate you now barely touches your spirit. This quietness feels unusual, almost unsettling at first, because you have been conditioned to believe that movement equals progress. But in the kingdom of God, stillness is often the beginning of elevation. When things around you slow down, it is a sign that God is speeding things up in the spirit. He is reorganizing your internal world to match the level of the breakthrough he has prepared. Inner stillness is heaven's way of fine-tuning your discernment. When your heart is calm, you begin to see with unusual clarity. You notice patterns you ignored before. You sense truths you once overlooked. You discern motives you once misjudged. You understand your own feelings with greater depth. You become aware of God's direction in ways that felt blurry during seasons of noise. Stillness sharpens your spiritual senses. It deepens your ability to hear instruction that would have been drowned out by emotional turmoil. God knows that you cannot receive precise guidance while fighting internal battles that drain your focus. So he calms the waves before releasing the command. Sometimes this stillness comes in the form of a sudden loss of desire for conflict. You find yourself refusing to argue about things that once consumed your energy. You choose silence over confrontation, peace over proving your point. It's not that you don't care, it's that you now understand the cost of wasted energy. You are starting to value your focus, your time, your emotional strength. You are choosing battles based on purpose, not pride. This shift is a sign that God is maturing your spirit for breakthrough. The less you react to distractions, the more room you have for divine direction. Inner stillness often reveals itself in how you process pressure. What once overwhelmed you now feels manageable. You stop panicking when problems arise. You stop rushing decisions. You stop forcing outcomes. You begin to trust that God is working even when you cannot see anything changing. Breakthrough requires this level of spiritual stability. If God were to give you the blessing before cultivating this inner calm, the weight of the blessing might feel like pressure rather than favor. So he strengthens your spirit, teaching you how to stand firmly in peace regardless of circumstances. There is also a stillness that comes from emotional release. God will allow you to grow so much that old wounds lose their power over you. Pain that used to dominate your heart no longer sits at the center of your identity. Memories that once defined you now feel distant, no longer sharp. The emotions that once controlled your reactions become transformed into wisdom. This healing is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply shows up one day when you realize that you responded from maturity instead of pain. That level of emotional quietness is a divine sign that God has prepared your heart for greater responsibility. Inner stillness is not the absence of movement, it's the presence of alignment. When God aligns your heart with his will, everything begins to move differently. Your decisions become intentional. Your choices become wiser. Your relationships become more meaningful. Your priorities shift from urgency to importance. You start wanting what God wants for you more than what you wanted for yourself. This alignment makes your spirit stable enough to carry the weight of breakthrough. God cannot entrust elevation to someone whose inner world is unstable, because instability magnifies blessing into burden. So he steadies your soul before expanding your life. Stillness also creates spiritual confidence. You begin to operate from a place of quiet assurance rather than desperation. You stop begging God and start trusting him. You stop chasing opportunity and start attracting it. You stop fearing loss and start expecting alignment. You stop doubting your worth and start embracing your identity. This confidence is not arrogance. It is the fruit of being anchored in God's timing and promises. When your spirit is quiet, you can sense God's nearness more clearly. And his nearness dissolves fear. A heart at rest becomes a heart that believes. The quiet season is often misunderstood by others. People may think you are distant, uninterested, or disconnected. They may assume you are withdrawing. But what they cannot see is that your spirit is being prepared for something monumental. You are not isolating yourself, you're being isolated by God. He is removing the noise so you can hear the instructions that will guide your next level. You are entering the kind of stillness that precedes divine strategies. What God whispers in this season will unlock doors. In this stillness, God begins to give you insight you were not ready for before. Ideas begin to form. Visions become clearer. Purpose becomes focused. You see pathways that were once hidden. You recognize opportunities disguised as challenges. You understand why certain things had to end. You start connecting spiritual dots that once felt scattered. Stillness becomes revelation, and revelation becomes preparation for breakthrough. There's also a deep sense of contentment that grows during this time. You no longer chase after things that used to distract you. You no longer cling to what God is removing. You no longer fear what comes next. This contentment is the sign that God has anchored you in himself. And a person anchored in God is unshakable, unmovable, unbreakable. They carry a quiet strength that cannot be explained or replicated. This is the strength required to sustain breakthrough. Inner stillness is the womb of transformation. It is the sacred environment where God shapes your character, refines your motives, heals your wounds, restores your vision, and prepares your spirit for the magnitude of what he is about to release. Before the breakthrough appears in your life, it first appears in your soul. The calm you feel is not a pause, it is a signal that heaven is arranging your steps, aligning your path, and preparing to reveal what your spirit has already been prepared to handle. God removes the noise not to silence your life, but to amplify his direction. He calms your emotions so your spirit can rise. He quiets your surroundings so his strategy can take shape. He fills your stillness with revelation, wisdom, strength, and divine clarity. And when your spirit is finally steady enough, the breakthrough that has been waiting will have the foundation it needs to manifest fully and powerfully in your life.